Hello, how is everyone? I hope you're all well, you beautiful, beautiful people. Now we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes today because this is going to be a bit of a longer one, and I appreciate that not everyone has hours upon hours to spend their time looking through videos. So what we're going to be doing in this video is going through the specific questions that were asked by Daniel over on the Drunk Turkey show when he has spoken to Dave. Cut through all the crap, get to the meat and potatoes, and tell you what his responses were to these specific questions. Strap yourself in, grab yourself a coffee, probably not hold that coffee in your mouth for too long because you know what happens on these videos sometimes. You end up spitting it everywhere, but we're going to crack on and get straight into it. So, look, so many of them knew and they believed everyone knew. This was one of the opening statements that was made by Dave, and he was a bit shocked by that. He was a bit shocked that some people just didn't realise what had happened around this area, and how they saw it. You know, they just thought that, you know, the general populace, if you like, knew that these kids knew about this crime earlier on in the day. But anyway, question 1, 9:30 chat scene. Were they on Snapchat? He responds, yes, they were. He was sent the odd one direct to his number, but the vast majority of this was a thread that was going on Snapchat. Messages from a certain group was the question. Yes, it was from the Pi Beta Phi sorority. It would appear that these were the group that had initially released all this information in amongst this group messaging, you know, chat that was going on. Did you assume that law enforcement knew? We assumed that parents and law enforcement must know if they knew. Why would the parents or law enforcement not know if we do? You know, it was just that common sense kind of thing. How would we know that something of this gravity has kicked off and law enforcement not be aware? Which kind of makes sense. Were the names of victims disclosed? He put that a couple of names were thrown around, but no certainty. The only certainty was that it happened at 1122 King Road. Did the messengers disclose the method of attack? He said, scrolling back through it was stated that there was a stabbing, but there was also a period that it was discussed about an OD. And this is what I found interesting. Everyone was talking about the OD. So, did he mean that it was just that someone had mentioned, and he didn't go into much detail on that? And when how he worded it, everyone was talking about the OD and not an OD, or, you know, it just made me think, so was there an OD? And were they talking about it? But we'll never know that. The chat then did not go back to a stabbing until after the university and law enforcement released the information on the event itself. So the next question was, when it was stated this was a target attack, did anyone come up with a theory as to why this would be targeted? We could think of no reason that the house or individuals would be targeted, which is important as we go through. But at this stage, that question, that was his answer. He said, we thought it was kind of like a Ted Bundy sort of thing. We thought some random weird person hosted this, and we did not know if it was going to keep going. We didn't know if they got the one guy or all the guys or the right guy. Again, listening to him say that and how fluidly that came out, I just found that a little bit odd that he'd said we didn't know if they got the one guy or all the guys. And I know some people are going to read into that, and maybe I'm reading into it because I then think back to one of the biggest things that we've considered, and is that whether Brian Coburg had done this on his own. But again, I could be reading into that too much. You'll have to let me know down below what you think. Did you ever hear the rumour that someone saw someone in the house? No, not until this came out later in the news. So he was completely unaware that someone had potentially seen someone. So in amongst all that chat and, the Pi Beta Phi sisters all speaking, nobody mentioned that Dylan had seen somebody. I found that, again, quite interesting. You live close to 1122 King Road and you were never approached by law enforcement. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. They never approached or spoke to us. In fact, they never searched the trash either. We have commercial style dumpsters that you can just walk up to. And I thought to myself, what the actual fuck? You've got some people who have been attacked. Now, if they've gone in there and they've seen all this and that sheath has been found, you would be thinking, right, so we're looking for a knife. Why would they not be in that area checking everything? To never check refuse in that area. Again, it's just something that I thought, that's bad. Law enforcement was staying on campus, right? He said, yes, that is correct, staying in a specific building. He did say, I didn't really hear what he said. Close by, and cars were parked outside the building, blacked out charges, etc. Did it look like they were investigating anyone at the university? You never really saw anyone come in or out. You saw them periodically move to the house and to other places, but they were being very secretive with their movements. He was then asked, did the FBI show up before or after the incident? Don't know why the FBI would have shown up before, but they asked. FBI showed up straight after the incident. Have law enforcement been a big presence in the area prior to the attack? He said, no, we've always had a relatively small force of about 24 officers with around half a dozen working at any one time. When did you first hear the information about the person returning to the area to find what had been discarded, and what did they see? So we're talking about these people. One of the guys, or a couple of the guys who were pulled over by the police, were asked about what they were doing in the area, and they had discarded stuff in the grass so they didn't get in trouble with the police. And they went back the following day to pick that up, and it was in this time frame that they believe that they saw potentially Brian Kohberger. So he said he heard it in the fall, towards the end of the semester, but he cannot remember if he was still in school or not. They said two of them went back and saw across the street a guy dressed all in black with his arms in his hoodie, with his arms up and hunched over while walking along. He ended up looking up and had a really cold stare, a really weird stare that kind of freaked him out. But then he just grabbed his stuff and thought no more about it. So he was questioned more on that. Was this spoken about before, after BK was arrested? He said he can't really remember. The story could have been embellished to fit BK, which is my note, because it would appear that he'd gone back to this guy prior to this interview with Daniel to retouch on it. And it's during this conversation, prior to this interview, where he's then kind of gone into more details about the stare, what he looked like, and said, yeah, it was definitely Brian Kohberger, it's definitely him. Which is the next question. Has he confirmed that the guy he saw looked like BK? Yes, he has. He said the guy was BK. He said he's not likely to come onto YouTube to confirm it, but he did say it. So, next question. The kids who were pulled over by the cops that night, so the kids who were actually in the area on the night, have never been reapproached by law enforcement. Law enforcement have never gone back to speak to them, nothing at all. So these are the people who would, in the area, who we've obviously seen in the body cam footage, etc., who were dealing with the police that night outside 1122 Kings Road on the green. They have never been reapproached by law enforcement to discuss whether they've seen anything. Nada. Nothing. You said you knew people at the house. Have you been in there? Are you familiar with the layout? I'm just going to chuck these notes back up so I can see. He said, I've been in there quite a few times, and for the most part, I roughly know where the bedrooms are, the bathroom and the laundry room, but mostly we just hung out in the common areas. He was asked, would it be difficult to navigate the house for someone unfamiliar with the property based on its size and layout? This is interesting, and this may answer a few questions. So yes, it would be. It is an incredibly odd build. It looks funky on the outside, but on the inside they have tried to squeeze in a few rooms, so when you walk in, you are just met with a bunch of doors and then the staircase. You would obviously have to guess which door goes to what, i.e. a bathroom. Even when you're told where the bathroom is, you're more often than not going to end up opening the wrong door. Some of the doors look like they are closets or bathrooms, and they are actually bedrooms. So he was then specifically asked, was Dylan's bedroom, based in its position, obviously a bedroom door, or could it have been mistaken for a closet? And this is an interesting answer. For a while, I was unaware that this room was a bedroom. For a long time, we didn't even realise it had 6 people, as we didn't know a lot of the rooms were bedrooms. Goes on to say that Dylan's room especially looked like a closet. So perhaps that would explain why Brian Koberger, or whoever entered this property and done this crime, had disregarded Dylan's bedroom. Did they just assume that that was a closet? Is it because of the positioning? I'm guessing if a door is on, say, the edge of a wall and it goes beyond the staircase, you could almost, especially if it was darker as well, consider that that was just a small little closet, rather than understanding that the room actually goes beyond the staircase. So I can actually picture that in my mind as being something that could have happened, which I hate to say, but I have to be fair. Were the doors commonly left unlocked, to your knowledge? Yes, prior to this happening, pretty much everyone left their doors unlocked. What was the primary means of entry into that house? Front door. It was tough to go round the back, so it made more sense to go in via the front door. Did the sliding door lock? I do not really know, but it was unlikely to have been locked, which I guess makes sense. What did they drink was a random question. Unsure on their choice of alcohol, and they went into a long conversation about getting alcohol off of campus. Have you been there when there wasn't a big party? How does sound travel? So he put not incredibly well, very industrial build, which I found a little bit of a contradiction, but then he does a pivot on this. I guess if the house was empty, you would hear if something is going on, but there would be likely a ton of variables. I think in any house, if it was quiet, you would hear anything that happened, which is pretty much common sense. So those who don't believe that things were heard in that property that night, you're insane. Was the police activity on the night of the murders a common thing? He says, yeah, around spring it's quite common, and that is also generally where they sit, and sometimes they're in uniform, and sometimes they are plain clothed. It would appear that this is an area that they spend a lot of time, law enforcement, trying to disperse people who may be drinking out on the streets, whatever, smoking, whatever, to move them along. There was a big party in the area at the time. Were you in the area at the time? He said, yes, I was, and I recall law enforcement had been called to another house to another complaint due to people being up on a roof, and the neighbours called the police. Interesting that all this happened and there were people even up on the rooftops, yet it would appear law enforcement struggled to speak to people. Do the students think BK is the right guy? And was the dog at the house? Do you know Jack D? This was like a combo question. He says he's unaware about the dog. He's seen Jack a couple of times but never went out of his way. And regarding whether they think BK is the killer or not, he said, we've never questioned it. Law enforcement come out, said, we've got the guy, and in their eyes, they had the guy. And BK was stalking, apparently. Have you ever seen or heard anything? You know, was BK familiar? They had someone come forward and said to him, oh, I remember seeing that guy. Said, none of us have ever seen him or familiar with him. So when they saw the guy who'd been arrested, BK, he was unfamiliar. No one had seen him. No one brought him up. Nothing. He was then asked about Brian Kopacker. Were you aware? He said, yes, I was aware of it. We just heard that it was some psycho guy that barricaded himself in and got taken out by SWAT. He was then asked, did anyone consider Kopacker prior to the BK arrest? He said, no, they didn't consider Kopacker, but this was around the same time that the skinned animals, etc. news was breaking. And he said, we did consider whether the person who had hurt these animals was the person who did this. They put the connection between how the psychology of serial killers is that they can harm animals. And he also found it very strange that it was almost like it was hidden. It wasn't in the media, it wasn't sort of news around the area with regards to law enforcement or the college. He actually only found out about it because of posts that are on social media, I believe Facebook. He found that a bit odd. He was asked if the skinned animals was something that had happened before, and this is when he went into it in more detail, as I've just said. He said, no, it's not something. He said he would have put it down to meth heads. He said they have a couple of meth heads in the area who wander around talking to themselves, and if it weren't for the fact that you can now look back on it after this event and put the two together, that's what he would have put it down to, the meth heads. So he was then asked, are you familiar with the people around, like the grub truck video, like in and harsh, etc.? And he just put, no, Greek people stick with the Greek fraternities, sororities, and we don't mingle with people outside of that. He was asked if there's intermingling between the universities. He put yes quite regularly. Obviously Tinder gets him to swap about. Swipe left, head over to Washington. But yeah, but that's the answer to that. Did attendance drop at the university? He said no, the university as a whole has not been affected by this. They are a government-funded university. It looks like they do a lot of research at the university. I believe he stated that they do a lot of work around sort of agricultural studies and feed information back into the government. So unless government grants were pulled, they wouldn't be affected by it. Again, this is something that we have speculated on, so it was interesting to hear that. Didn't really go into any further information on that. So now we look at some of the questions that were thrown in through the live chat. Let's have a look at this. They were specifically asking about his connection to these, whether he was close friends. He said, no, we weren't close friends, as in, and not the sort of people who have rung up and said, what are we doing tonight? We were just people who, you know, if we was at a bar or in class together, we would talk. So more social friendships than close friendships. They were asked about, obviously, going back into this 8-hour delay and the fact that there clearly was a delay, and nobody can now say anything about whether it was right or wrong to call law enforcement. These people knew about this situation. I am now 100% sure that there was at least a 3-hour delay with which law enforcement should have been called. And he was asked straight out, is it sort of fraternity, sorority rule that they are called first in this incident? And he said most of his experience is either being taken to halls or taken to hospital. There's an immunity law, but it only covers one person. So I'm guessing if something happens, say someone has an accident or gets into a fight, if you like, they can be taken somewhere by one person, and that one person who takes them are not then brought into connection with what has ever happened. I may have got that wrong, but that's what it sounded like. What is a house mum, he was asked. This is someone who is hired to live in the house and keep the eye on the girls. So he was then re-asked what would happen in a fight then. Would law enforcement be called or would it be contained? He put, depends on the severity. There have been situations where cops have come out. He went into a story about where they built a platform of some description. The platform collapsed. A few people were hurt. Law enforcement obviously came up. But he said with respect of like a fight, if it was something that could be contained, then law enforcement won't be called. And when he sort of speaks about this situation, again, he can't understand, even this guy can't understand why law enforcement weren't called and there was this delay. Why did people know this before law enforcement were called? I would probably have called my mum first, he said. My mum would have likely told me to get off the phone and call 911. And he said, I cannot see them calling anyone that could potentially see them getting into trouble. So he said he can't see them going to sort of the house mum because they could, in effect, put them in a position where they could be kicked out of the house, and taken up for review. So he said, look, this isn't really something that is likely to happen. He would have expected in this situation for law enforcement to be called. Perhaps a parent first, but it would appear that in this situation they reached out to the sorority sisters. And this is when that then escalated. And from sort of my common sense, I would say that what happened was there was something going on. And we're going to get into the narcotics situation in a second. But I would imagine instead of calling the parents and then call 911, they called the sorority or contacted the sorority sisters, whether that was on call or whatever, and it got into this chat. Potentially someone was called and they then went into Snapchat, and then people then started going over to the house, and that's when you ended up in this situation. But it does bring into question about the law enforcement 911 call. Why haven't we heard it? Why isn't it public when that should be public record? Is it because that was just, again, a complete and utter clusterfuck? Were there multiple calls? Could they not pinpoint which was the initial call? Which I just don't know. But we'll hear later on, I would imagine. So he was then asked about the drug situation, narcotics in his house. So he said, in comparison to the houses in this area, would you say that this house had more drugs, less drugs, and you know what I'm getting at. So he said, look, there's multiple houses in this area. Some of them are completely clean, and some of them are not. Some of them, there might be 6 people living in there, and 2 of them are involved in narcotics. I found that he skirted around this a bit. He was answering, but you could tell he was uncomfortable answering. So he sort of concluded on, all I can tell you is that they were there. And that was pretty much it. That was all of the questions. Now, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts and feelings are, whether that has changed your opinion on certain things, such as Dylan's room being left. That stuck out to me. Was this something that does that now make more sense? About the navigation of the house and struggling, even though you could then appreciate that Dylan's room would have potentially been missed, it would appear that because of the time constraint in this attack, that they would have had to have had some knowledge of where to go and whose room was who, or someone would have potentially been going through the house, open, no, close, open, no, close. Do you know what I mean? And they wouldn't have had time to do that. So to go in through the sliding door, seemingly either directly to, Xana and Ethan, or going up the stairs to Kaylee and Maddie and then coming back down, it seemed like it was quite purposeful. They knew where they were going, and this guy kind of makes it very clear that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to do that, and that would have hindered the time frame. But again, let me know down below what you think. With regards to my opinion on this, I was more on the fence with Dave before. I do feel that he is being genuine, he is being honest, but I do feel that he is holding back on certain specific elements of what we're talking about, more specific to the house and what he knew about what was going on in the house. this interview didn't really touch on Emma and Demetrius at all. But that is everything. And hopefully that's given you everything from that interview over at the Drunk Turkey Show. If you do want to watch the entire interview, head over there. Obviously, I've given you bare bones to make it quicker. But for now, that's me. I'm Harsh, and I'll catch you all in the next one.